Part 1, The First Signs. I always considered myself a trusting man. After all, trust was the foundation of every meaningful relationship in my life, especially with my family. My name is Jack, and if you had asked me a few months ago, I would have told you that I was one of the lucky ones. I had a good job, a beautiful home, a supportive brother, and a wife I adored. Her name was Lily, and from the moment we met, I thought I had found my partner for life. We met at a mutual friend's wedding. I had just finished college and was starting my first job, full of ambition and dreams. Lily was a couple of years younger than me, still in school, studying art. She had this way of making me feel like the most interesting person in the room, like I was someone worth paying attention to. That was rare for me, even growing up. My younger brother, Sam, always seemed to have that gift. He could walk into a room and own it without even trying. I was quieter, more reserved, the one who blended into the background while he thrived in the spotlight. Lily and I got married just a year after we met. It felt fast, but everything about us felt right. We settled into a comfortable life together. Sure, there were ups and downs, what marriage doesn't have them, but for the most part, we were happy. Or at least, I thought we were. It wasn't until recently that I started noticing small things that didn't quite add up. I don't know if it was the way Lily seemed distracted and we were together or how she had started spending more time with Sam. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sam was always around, he and I had a close relationship. Growing up, we were practically inseparable, even though we were different in so many ways. Sam was the outgoing one, always confident, always the life of the party. He was the guy who could charm anyone, the kind of guy everyone wanted to be around. I was quieter, more thoughtful, the one who stayed home while Sam went out with friends. Despite our differences, we had always been close. So when Lily and Sam became friends, I didn't think anything of it. It felt natural, like an extension of our family bond. But then, little things started to change. Lily's laughter would be a little louder when Sam was around. She'd talk about him in ways that made me feel like I was somehow not part of the conversation. I'd come home from work, and they'd be sitting in the living room, deep in conversation, their heads close together. When I asked what they were talking about, they'd brush it off like it was nothing. "Oh, just some silly thing from work," Lily would say, or Sam would crack a joke to change the subject. At first, I chalked it up to my own paranoia. I had never been the jealous type. Sam had always been better with people, and I figured it was just his natural charm at work. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't just the conversations, they were spending more time together, too. Lily would go out during the day, telling me she was meeting up with friends, but when I asked which friends, she was always vague. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. It had been a rough day at work, and all I wanted was to sit down and relax. I stepped into the house, expecting to find Lily in the kitchen or maybe curled up on the couch with a book. Instead, I heard voices coming from the back room, Lily's voice, soft and familiar, and Sam's deeper, unmistakable tone. I stood there for a moment, frozen, listening to their conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but there was something about the way they spoke to each other that felt intimate. More intimate than a conversation between a wife and her brother-in-law should be. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to shake it off. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. There was nothing going on. There couldn't be. I called out to them as I walked through the house, trying to act casual. The conversation stopped abruptly, and when I entered the room, they both looked up at me with wide, surprised eyes. "Hey, Jack," Sam said, standing up a little too quickly. "Didn't expect you home so early." Lily smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was just telling Sam about my day," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Nothing exciting." I nodded, trying to shake off the growing feeling in my gut. "Yeah, well, I finished up early," I said, forcing a smile. "Figured I'd come home and relax." We spent the rest of the evening together, the three of us, but something had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt like an outsider in my own home. Lily and Sam exchanged glances that I didn't understand, and there were moments when their laughter seemed a little too easy, a little too comfortable. As the days went on, my unease grew. I started paying closer attention to the things I had previously brushed off. Lily's phone was always on silent now, and she would step out of the room to take calls more often than before. When I asked her about it, she'd say it was nothing, just a friend or a work thing. But her explanations were vague, and I could feel the distance between us widening. I didn't want to believe that anything was wrong. Lily had been my rock, the person I trusted most in the world. And Sam, well, he was my brother. We had always had each other's backs. The idea that they could be hiding something from me was unthinkable. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, the doubts lingered. The turning point came one Friday night. I had made plans to meet some colleagues for a drink after work, but I wasn't feeling up to it. Something inside me told me to go home instead, to be with Lily. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet, and for a brief moment, I thought I was alone. But then I heard it, the low murmur of voices coming from the bedroom. Lily's voice, unmistakable, and Sam's, quieter but just as familiar. They were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I stood there in the hallway, my heart racing, my hands trembling. I knew I should go in, confront them, but I couldn't move. Something held me back, a fear I couldn't quite understand. And that's when it hit me, something was going on. Something that went beyond the laughter and the glances and the hushed conversations. I didn't know what it was yet, but deep down, I knew that whatever it was going to change everything. Part 2, a brief reprieve. The weekend after that Friday night was quiet, too quiet, almost unsettling. Sam had left for a business trip that Sunday morning. He'd be gone for a week, heading out to some conference in another city, and for the first time in what felt like months, I found myself alone with Lily. When Sam left, there was no goodbye hug between the two of them, no lingering glance. Just a brief exchange of words, and then he was out the door, suitcase in hand. It should have felt like things were going back to normal, like the tension that had been building up for weeks might finally ease. But even as I watched his car pull away, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. For the first few days of Sam's absence, life seemed to settle into a strange kind of calm. Lily and I spent more time together. She seemed more present, like the woman I used to know. We had dinners at home, watched movies in the evenings, and shared quiet conversations over cups of coffee in the mornings. It was almost like we were rediscovering each other, like we were trying to piece back together something that had been slowly falling apart. I wanted to believe that things were finally getting better, that maybe the distance I'd felt was just a result of my own paranoia, fed by months of watching Sam and Lily grow closer. Maybe, with him gone, we could find our way back to each other. But no matter how hard I tried to enjoy those moments with her, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the doubt. It clung to me like a shadow, a constant reminder that something was still off. Every time Lily glanced at her phone or stepped out of the room for a moment longer than seemed necessary, that doubt crept back in. And every time it did, it chipped away at the fragile peace we'd managed to create. One evening, a few days into Sam's trip, we were sitting together in the living room. The TV was on, playing some mindless sitcom, but I wasn't really watching it. I was watching her. Lily sat on the other end of the couch, her legs curled beneath her, her eyes on the screen. She looked so calm, so at ease, but something about it felt forced, like she was pretending to be someone else. I cleared my throat, and she glanced over at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her tone light. I hesitated. I didn't want to start a fight or ruin whatever tentative peace we had found in Sam's absence. But the words were sitting there, heavy on my chest, waiting to be said. "Lily," I began slowly, do you think we're okay? I mean, really okay?" She blinked, surprised by the question, and for a moment, I thought she might laugh it off. But instead, she sighed softly and set the remote down on the coffee table. "I don't know, Jack," she said, her voice quieter now. Things haven't been the same for a while, have they? I shook my head. No, they haven't. There was a long pause, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I wanted to ask her about Sam, to confront her about all the moments that had felt wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. Instead, I asked the one question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. Are you happy? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lily's eyes softened, and she looked away, staring at her hands folded in her lap. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I was. But lately, I don't know anymore. Her words hit me harder than I expected, like a punch to the gut. I had known something was wrong for a while, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. What changed? I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew the answer. Lily hesitated again, biting her lip as if she were carefully choosing her next words. I think we've just grown distant, she said after a moment. We don't talk like we used to. We don't connect. And it's been hard. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Is it me? Did I do something wrong? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. It's not your fault, Jack. You've always been good to me. It's just life, I guess. Things change. People change. People change. The words lingered in the air, and I couldn't help but think of Sam. He had always been such a central part of our lives, but lately, it felt like he had become something else entirely, something I didn't fully understand. I thought about all the times I had seen them together, the quiet moments I had dismissed as nothing more than friendly conversation. Maybe they were more than that. Maybe they had crossed a line, and I had been too blind to see it. But without Sam here, I couldn't ask him, and I wasn't ready to ask her. Not yet. That night, I lay in bed next to Lily, staring up at the ceiling as she slept beside me. The house was quiet, save for the sound of her soft breathing, but my mind was anything but calm. I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months, about all the things I had ignored or brushed off. The truth was staring me in the face, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. As the week went on, Sam's absence began to feel like both a relief and a burden. I didn't have to see the two of them together, didn't have to watch their conversations and wonder what they weren't telling me. But at the same time, the silence between Lily and me felt heavier than ever. Without Sam there as a distraction, I was forced to confront the reality of my relationship with Lily, and it wasn't pretty. By the time Sam's return was drawing near, I had made up my mind. I couldn't keep living like this, with doubts and suspicions eating away at me. I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to ask the questions I had been avoiding for so long. When Sam came back, I was ready. But little did I know, the truth I was about to uncover would be more devastating than anything I could have imagined. Part 3, The Weight of Truth. The day Sam returned from his business trip, the air in the house felt heavier. It was as though everything had shifted while he was away, even though nothing had really changed. Or maybe it was just me. I had spent the entire week wrestling with my suspicions, trying to piece together fragments of moments that I had ignored for too long. When Sam walked through the door, he was his usual self, bright, charming, always with a smile. He dropped his suitcase by the door and stretched his arms out wide. "Home sweet home," he announced cheerfully, walking straight over to Lily and pulling her into a warm hug. I watched from the doorway, my heart sinking in my chest as I observed them. There it was again, that familiar ease between them. The kind of comfort you'd expect between family, but something about it still felt wrong. Lily hugged him back, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes when she glanced my way, guilt, perhaps, or maybe just discomfort. "Good to have you back, man," I said, forcing a smile as Sam released her and turned toward me. "You have no idea," Sam chuckled, patting me on the back. "That trip was a bore. Glad to be back in civilization." We sat down together that evening, the three of us, for what should have been a relaxed dinner. But there was a tension under the surface that none of us addressed. It was as though everyone in the room was aware that something unsaid was hanging in the air, but no one dared to speak it aloud. I could barely eat. My stomach was twisted in knots, my mind racing. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. I had spent the entire week preparing myself to confront them, to ask the questions that had been weighing on me for months. But now, as I sat there, my resolve was crumbling. What if I was wrong? What if all of this was in my head? But then, halfway through dinner, something happened that pushed me over the edge. Lily had stepped out of the room to grab dessert, leaving Sam and me alone at the table. There was a brief silence between us before Sam leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the kitchen, then back at me. "So," he said, his voice casual but with a hint of something else underneath. "How've things been while I was gone?" It was an innocent enough question, but there was something in the way he asked it that made my skin crawl. His tone was too light, too easy, like he was testing the waters. My pulse quickened, and I felt my chest tighten. "Fine," I replied, though my voice came out more clipped than I intended. Sam raised an eyebrow, clearly picking up on my tone. He gave a small, knowing smile, then took a sip of his drink. "You sure?" That smile, that damned smile, was all it took. It was like he was taunting me, like he knew exactly what I had been thinking and was daring me to call him out. The frustration that had been building inside me for so long finally snapped. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "Sam," I began, my voice low, "I need to ask you something." His expression didn't change. If anything, he looked more amused, as though he had been expecting this conversation. "Shoot." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my ears. "Are you and Lily, is there something going on between you two?" There it was. The question I had been avoiding for so long, finally out in the open. The moment the words left my mouth, the room seemed to freeze. Sam didn't react immediately. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable, before setting his drink down slowly. For a long moment, there was only silence. My pulse was racing, and I could feel sweat starting to form on the back of my neck. I didn't know what I expected him to say, denial, anger, maybe even laughter, but instead, he just leaned back in his chair and let out a soft sigh. "Jack," he said quietly, "I think you already know the answer to that." My stomach dropped. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, and I was free falling into some dark, bottomless pit. I had hoped, prayed, even, that I was wrong. That all of this had been a product of my own paranoia. But now, hearing the confirmation in his voice, I couldn't deny it any longer. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sam didn't look away, didn't flinch. "A few months," he admitted. "It just happened." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. A few months. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind, so oblivious to what was going on right under my nose? "I never meant for this to happen," Sam continued, his tone still maddeningly calm. "It wasn't planned, Jack. You have to understand that." I shook my head, trying to process what he was telling me. "You're my brother," I said, my voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" Sam sighed again, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't plan it, Jack. I didn't set out to hurt you. But I can't deny what happened, either. And Lily, well, she's been feeling lost for a while now. You know that." I felt sick. My own brother, someone I had trusted, someone I had grown up with, shared my life with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And Lily, the woman I had loved and built a life with, had let it happen. I didn't know who to be angrier with, Sam, for crossing that line, or Lily, for letting him. The sound of footsteps behind me pulled me from my thoughts, and I turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, holding a plate of dessert. Her eyes flicked between the two of us, confusion and concern written on her face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I couldn't even look at her. My chest felt tight, my throat constricted with anger and hurt. How could she stand there, pretending like everything was fine when she had been lying to me for months. "We need to talk," I said, my voice hoarse. Lily's eyes widened slightly, and she set the plate down on the counter. "Jack." But I couldn't let her finish. "Not now. Not after everything I had just learned." "Don't," I said, standing up from the table. "Just, don't." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to get away from the crushing weight of their betrayal before it suffocated me completely. Part 4, The Storm Inside. I stepped out of the house and into the cool night air, hoping it would help clear my head, but the swirling storm of emotions inside me didn't settle. It was as if the entire world had shifted beneath my feet, leaving me standing on shaky ground. I took a deep breath, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. The anger, the betrayal, and the disbelief hit me in waves, crashing one after another. How could this have happened? How had my own brother, Sam, crossed that line? How had Lily, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, let it happen? The questions circled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I found myself walking aimlessly down the street, my feet carrying me without direction. The quiet of the night felt oppressive, as if the world itself was pressing in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. My mind replayed the conversation with Sam over and over. The calmness in his voice, the lack of guilt, the casual way he had admitted everything, it all felt like a slap to the face. I hadn't expected an apology, but I also hadn't expected him to be so indifferent. He was my brother. My blood. And he had destroyed the one thing I had thought was solid in my life. My marriage. I stopped walking and leaned against a lamppost, my hands shaking as I gripped the cold metal. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to let out the rage that was building inside me. But instead, all I could do was stand there, my body trembling with the weight of everything that had been revealed. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I fumbled for it, half expecting to see a message from Sam or Lily. But when I looked at the screen, it was a text from an old friend, Dave. He had no idea what was going on, of course, how could he? It was a simple message, asking if I wanted to grab a drink sometime soon. The timing was almost laughable. I stared at the message for a moment, considering the offer. A drink sounded like exactly what I needed. Something to dull the pain, even if only for a little while. Without thinking too much, I typed back a quick reply, "Yeah, let's do it." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued walking. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I didn't want to go home yet. Not while Lily and Sam were still there. I couldn't face them, not after what had just happened. The thought of going back inside that house, pretending like things were normal, made my skin crawl. Eventually, I found myself standing outside a small bar a few blocks from home. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went, but tonight, it didn't matter. I pushed open the door and walked inside, the low hum of conversation clinking glasses greeting me as I entered. The dim lighting felt like a relief after the harsh brightness of the confrontation at home. I made my way to the bar and ordered a whiskey, the burn of the alcohol a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. As I sipped the drink, I let my mind drift, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Had I missed the signs? Had Lily and Sam been this close all along, and I had just been too blind to see it? I thought back to the little moments, the times when Lily had seemed distant, the way Sam had been around her at family gatherings. But nothing had stood out to me at the time. I had trusted both of them completely. It had never crossed my mind that either of them would betray me like this. I drained the rest of my drink and signaled the bartender for another. The alcohol was doing its job, dulling the sharp edges of my thoughts, but the pain was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. As I sat there, nursing my second drink, I felt my phone buzz again. I hesitated for a moment before pulling it out of my pocket. This time, it was a message from Lily. Jack, please come home. We need to talk. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting with a mix of anger and dread. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to stay at the bar and drink until the pain went away. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Eventually, I would have to face them both. I would have to confront the mess that my life had become. Reluctantly, I set down my glass and stood up, tossing a few bills on the bar before heading back out into the night. The walk home felt longer than usual, each step heavy with the weight of what was waiting for me when I got there. When I reached the house, I paused outside the front door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I wasn't ready for this. But then again, when would I ever be ready to confront the betrayal of my wife and my brother? Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. Lily was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with worry and guilt. Sam wasn't there. I didn't know if that was a relief or if it made things worse. "Jack," she said softly, standing up as I walked into the living room. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. The sight of her standing there, looking so fragile, so guilty, only made the hurt worse. "We need to talk," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my emotions in check. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice cold and distant. "Yes, there is," she insisted, taking a step toward me. "I need to explain." I shook my head, the anger I had been holding back finally bubbling to the surface. "Explain what, Lily? That you've been lying to me for months? That you and Sam—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt like poison in my mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. I was too hurt, too angry. "I'm sorry, Jack," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's what Sam said. Funny how neither of you meant for this to happen, yet here we are." Lily's shoulders slumped, and she wiped at her eyes. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've ruined everything, and I'll never be able to fix it. But please, Jack, let me explain. Let me try to make you understand." I stared at her, my heart heavy with a mix of rage and sorrow. Could anything she said really make this better? Could any explanation erase the betrayal I felt? "Fine," I said finally, my voice flat. "Explain." Part 5, the weight of her words. Lily stood there, wiping at her eyes, trying to compose herself. The room was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by her shaky breathing. I sat down on the edge of the armchair across from her, keeping a safe distance. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I braced myself for whatever came next. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Jack, this wasn't something I planned. I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray you, or destroy what we had." I didn't respond. There was a part of me that didn't want to hear her excuses, that felt like no explanation could make this better. But I had to know. I had to understand how things had fallen apart so completely, so suddenly. "I don't know when it started to happen, exactly," she continued, her voice fragile, like she was walking on broken glass. "But Sam and we just got closer. At first, it was innocent. He would come over to visit, and we'd talk when you were busy or out. You know how easy it is to talk to him. He's always been good at listening." I scoffed at that. Of course Sam was good at listening. That was one of his charms, his ability to make you feel heard. It was what drew people to him. And now, I realized, it was part of what had drawn my wife to him. Lily hesitated, wringing her hands together. "It wasn't anything more than that at first. I swear, Jack." But then, as time went on, things just shifted. I can't even pinpoint when it happened. One day, I just realized I was thinking about him more than I should have been. And the guilt started creeping in. My chest tightened at her words. She was admitting it. She was telling me, right to my face, that she had developed feelings for my brother. I clenched my fists, my knuckles turning white, but I kept quiet, waiting for her to continue. "Jack, you were always working. I'm not blaming you, I know you were doing it for us, for our future. But it felt like you weren't really there anymore. We barely talked like we used to. And I felt alone. Her voice cracked, and she looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Alone. She felt alone. I had heard this before, in different variations, but somehow it hit harder coming from Lily. I had been working long hours, I knew that. But I had thought we were okay. I had thought we were just going through a rough patch. Every couple does, right? You pull through it. You get stronger. But that doesn't justify what I did, she said quickly, as if reading my thoughts. I know it doesn't. I should have talked to you. I should have told you how I was feeling instead of turning to Sam. But it was easier, you know? Easier to just let him fill the gaps that had formed between us. The weight of her words pressed down on me, and I felt the sting of them in my chest. I had been so focused on providing, on being the best version of myself for our future, that I hadn't seen what was happening in the present. I hadn't seen the cracks forming in our relationship. But hearing her say it aloud, hearing that she had turned to Sam to fill those cracks, was almost unbearable. I never wanted this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted it to go as far as it did. But once it started, I didn't know how to stop it. I shook my head, finally finding my voice. You didn't know how to stop it? Lily, you could have stopped it by never starting it in the first place. You could have told me. You could have walked away from him the moment you felt something was wrong. Her face crumpled, and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I know, Jack. I know I should have. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her apologies felt hollow, like they weren't enough to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. She might be sorry, but the damage was done. Nothing could undo what had happened. Nothing could take back the fact that she had betrayed me with my own brother. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to process everything. So when exactly did it start, Lily? How long have you been lying to me? She winced at the question, clearly dreading the answer. It's been a few months. A few months? The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't help it. Months. She had been carrying on with Sam for months, all while looking me in the eye and pretending that everything was fine. I know how awful that sounds, she said quickly. And it wasn't always physical. It was more emotional at first. But then it escalated. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. And what about Sam? Did he have any guilt about betraying his own brother? Lily bit her lip, looking pained. He did. He struggled with it, Jack. We both did. We talked about ending it so many times, but it was like we were caught in something we couldn't escape. Couldn't escape? I echoed, incredulous. You're telling me that the two of you, grown adults, couldn't find the willpower to stop? You chose to keep going. You chose to hurt me. She lowered her head, her shoulders trembling as she sobbed quietly. I know. You're right. I don't have an excuse. There's no justification for what we did. The room fell into silence again, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss. Every part of me wanted to scream, to lash out, to make her feel the pain that was ripping through me. But I couldn't. It wasn't in me to be that kind of person. I just don't understand, I said, my voice breaking. How could you do this, Lily? We were supposed to be a team. We were supposed to get through everything together. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I don't know, Jack. I don't know how it happened. But I regret it. I regret all of it. If I could go back and change things, I would. I stared at her, feeling a deep sense of loss. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had shattered everything we had built. And no matter how much she regretted it, nothing would ever be the same. I need time, I said finally, my voice hollow. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do now. Lily nodded, wiping at her eyes. I understand. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the living room, heading upstairs to our bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my head pounding. The weight of her betrayal settled over me like a suffocating blanket, and I sank down onto the floor, my hands shaking as I tried to hold myself together. What was I supposed to do now? Where did we go from here? Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever look at Sam the same way again? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the life I had known was gone, and there was no going back. Part 6, The Final Reckoning. The days that followed were a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the chaos that had become my life. Every morning, would get up, go through the motions, and pretend that things were normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Everything had been tainted by Lily's betrayal, and Sam's. I avoided Lily as much as I could. The house felt like a prison, the air between us thick with tension and unspoken words. She tried to reach out, to apologize again, but I shut her down every time. I wasn't ready to talk. I didn't know if I ever would be. The worst part was the silence from Sam. I had expected him to call, to try and explain himself, to offer some kind of apology, no matter how hollow. But there was nothing. Not a single message, not a single attempt to reach me. It was as if he had vanished from my life completely. And maybe that was for the best. A week passed before I finally reached my breaking point. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the loss, was too much to carry alone. I needed answers, closure, something to help me make sense of it all. So I made a decision. I was going to confront Sam. I hadn't spoken to him since I found out. I wasn't sure what I would say, or even how I would feel seeing him face to face again. But I knew I couldn't move on without this confrontation. I had to know why. Why he, of all people, had crossed that line. I drove to his apartment in the early evening, my stomach in knots the entire way there. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. I parked outside his building and sat in the car for a few moments, gathering my thoughts. What could I possibly say that would make this any better? What could he say that would undo the damage he had caused? When I finally got out of the car, my legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk up to his door. My fist hovered for a second before I knocked. A few moments later, the door opened, and there he was, Sam, my brother. He looked surprised to see me, his expression a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there, staring at me as if he didn't know how to start. "Jack," he finally muttered, his voice low. "I didn't expect. Can I come in?" I cut him off, my tone cold and controlled. I wasn't here for pleasantries. Sam hesitated for a second before stepping aside to let me in. I walked past him, into the small apartment, and immediately felt the weight of the situation. This was my brother, someone I had grown up with, someone I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. And yet, here I was, about to confront him for betraying me in the worst way possible. He closed the door behind me, and we stood there in an uncomfortable silence, neither of us knowing where to begin. I was the first to speak. "Why, Sam?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Why did you do it? Why her?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know, Jack," he said quietly. "I wish I had a better answer for you. But I don't." "That's not good enough," I snapped, the anger I had been holding in for so long finally bubbling to the surface. "You don't just get to say you don't know and expect that to be okay. You were my brother. You were supposed to have my back, and instead, I stopped, my throat tightening with emotion. "You tore everything apart." Sam flinched at my words, but he didn't try to defend himself. He knew there was no defense. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I swear to you, Jack, I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice hard. You both did. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with remorse. I know, he admitted. And I've been trying to figure out how to make it right ever since. But the truth is, I can't. There's nothing I can do or say that will fix this. I shook my head, my chest tight with pain and frustration. How long, Sam? How long were you sneaking around behind my back? He swallowed hard, his face pale. It started a few months ago. I don't know exactly when. It was never supposed to be anything more than just talking. I know that sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, it felt like nothing. Nothing? I echoed, incredulous. It was something to me, Sam. It was something to my marriage. To everything I thought we had. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know I messed up. I never should have let it get that far. I never should have crossed that line. But I did, and I'm sorry. Sorry. That word felt meaningless now. It was just an empty promise, a hollow apology for a wound too deep to heal with words. I trusted you, I said, my voice shaking. I trusted you with everything. And you threw it all away. Sam stepped closer, his face etched with regret. Jack, I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you. I don't expect you to forgive me either. But I need you to know that it wasn't about trying to hurt you. It wasn't about jealousy or resentment. It just happened. I backed away from him, unable to handle the weight of his words. It just happened. That phrase echoed in my mind, over and over. It was such a pathetic excuse for something so destructive. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said honestly. You and Lily, you both made choices. Choices that tore everything apart. Sam didn't say anything. He just stood there, his face a mask of guilt and sorrow, as if he knew that this was the moment when everything between us would change forever. I need time, I said finally. I need time to figure out what comes next. But right now, I can't do this. Sam nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I get it, Jack. And I'll be here if you ever want to talk. But I understand if you don't. I turned to leave, my heart heavy with a mixture of grief and anger. As I walked out of his apartment, I felt a strange sense of finality. Things would never be the same between us. No matter how much time passed, the trust we had once shared was gone. And there was no going back. The drive home was quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep shade of blue. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain, the life I had once known was over. As I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house in front of me. Lily was inside, waiting. Waiting for answers, waiting for the inevitable conversation we still hadn't had. But right now, I wasn't ready to face it. I stayed there, in the quiet darkness, letting the weight of everything settle around me. Maybe one day, I would find a way to move forward. Maybe one day, I would find peace. But today wasn't that day.